Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a huge pleasure to be here at the Emmanuel Hall once again and to address you at this conference. You'll notice I'm the last speaker before the Q&A session. I've got used to being the last speaker, haven't I? In a couple of weeks' time, it'll be 14 years since I was first elected to represent my home constituency of North West Leicestershire. And I have literally spoken in the chamber of the House of Commons on thousands of occasions. However, I must admit this evening I'm feeling a little bit nervous. You'll have noticed over the last 18 months I'm not actually used to addressing an audience anymore. And if I am addressing an audience, they're normally trying to get out the back door as I stand up. I'm going to talk about the vaccine harms. I'm well aware of many of the important issues that have been presented to you this evening. I've concentrated, to start with, on the vaccine harms because, very sadly, none of the governments around the world, they can manipulate the figures, manipulate the debates, but very sadly they can't hide the bodies. And I spoke out for the first time in December 2022 when the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency were seeking to get authorization from the government to extend the authorization of the vaccines down to children of 5 years old down to 6 months. And from the moment I spoke out in that chamber of the House of Commons, my life changed. I was no longer invited onto any mainstream media. I was counselled. Colleagues I'd known in the House of Commons for years turned their backs on me. But something else happened. I got thousands and thousands and thousands of emails from people all over the world who were vaccine harmed or vaccine bereaved. So I lost a lot of friends, but I made a lot of new friends. Perhaps my old friends weren't my friends after all. And as a result of that speech on the 13th of December 2022, and the government, of course, said that I was a conspiracy theorist. But what I will tell you is that mysteriously, our government in the UK is one of the few governments that never dared authorize those vaccines for little children and babies. And that was worth it. I was suspended from the Conservative Party on the 11th of January 2023 for alleged anti-Semitism, for retweeting a Jewish scientist paper from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And before I was actually thrown out of the party, I had a meeting with a party grandee, and I explained my concerns for an hour and a half about the safety and efficacy of the COVID-19 so-called vaccines. I also raised my concerns about the midazolam and morphine, NG163, and I was listened to with a rather sad look in their eyes as they looked on me. And at the end of the meeting, I said, well, what do you think? And they said calmly, Andrew, there is currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may well be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind that you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world with all the personal risk for you which that will entail. And I told them, I'm out of here, this meeting's over. When I spoke out on the 17th of March on the safety and efficacy of the booster programme, quoting the government's own data back to them in that debate, and the number needed to vaccinate with the booster, which is supposed to be safe and effective, which is going to keep one person out of hospital. And the government data was put into decade-size age groups, and also split into healthy and those with comorbidities, the at-risk groups for each age group. And from memory, the healthy 40 to 49-year age group, you had to boost, according to the government's own figures, 934,400 people to keep one person out of hospital presenting with COVID-19. And with a severe adverse event rate of 1 in 800 of the boosters, you were going to put about 1,150 people at risk of death or serious injury, life-changing injury, to keep one person from presenting at hospital, not going into intensive care, just presenting at hospital with COVID-19. Again, the government said I was a conspiracy theorist, but within 3 weeks, the government had restricted the boosters to only the over 75s and the immunosuppressed. I've become extremely suspicious in the mother of all parliaments of any topic which my colleagues don't want to talk about. They don't want to talk about the safety and efficacy of the vaccines. They certainly don't want to talk about excess deaths. They don't want to talk about the WHO instruments, the amendments to the international health regulations, and the so-called pandemic accord or treaty or agreement. Well, I can assure you, I don't think anybody in this room has agreed to those instruments, and I can assure you that no one in North West Leicestershire has agreed to them, and their representative will not be voting for them when they come forward. I believe I actually had the first ever debate in any parliament in the world on excess deaths, and it took some doing. I applied 26 times from January 2023. I can only apply once a week. I can only apply in a sitting week of Parliament for the debate on excess deaths, and I had 26 times that my request was refused before I finally got a date. And it always came back unsuccessful in ballot. You can see why I don't play the lottery, can't you? Following that, I managed to bring over, I think we had 6 or 7 MPs turned up to that debate on excess deaths. It was the end of the parliamentary week, the last adjournment debate of that session. On December the 4th, I raised the money and got some medical experts and scientists over from America and the UK, and we presented to a lot of MPs, 24 MPs in a committee room, and I had greats like Robert Malone, the scientist who discovered the mRNA technology. I had Dr. Pierre Corey, I had Dr. Ryan Cole, I had the excellent Professor Angus Dalgleish, and I also had Steve Kirsch, the analyst over from America. And following that, I managed to get a debate for 90 minutes in Westminster Hall on the 16th of January this year. And we actually had 26 members of Parliament turn up, which is a bit of a record. Out of 650, that is lamentable when we're talking about an issue, excess deaths, are affecting every constituency in the country. I spoke for half an hour. There was enough attendees that the backbench contributions were limited to 3 minutes. That is completely unacceptable at a debate of that importance, which I think was belittled by us being in Westminster Hall and not the main chamber, given that so many people have lost loved ones over the last few years. But I got them to sign up, and despite the pushback, a week today, should be having a 3-hour debate in the main House of Commons on the COVID-19 pandemic response and excess deaths. And I want you all I want you all to put pressure on your own elected representatives from wherever you come in the country and say how important it is that they attend that debate a week today in the main chamber and listen and hopefully contribute to that debate, because it might be the first debate we're going to have full debate in the main chamber, but I'm very sad we're not going to see an end to the vaccine harms yet. The first step to sorting out a problem is admitting we've got a problem, and we're a very long way in our Parliament from admitting that. There's some really big issues that we're facing. It is very much a fight for the future of humanity, and I guess it must be a conspiracy because our so-called elected politicians who are there to represent the people are making the same ludicrous mistakes that are detrimental to your future and the future of our children in all the countries of the world. How can that be? How can they all have lost their collective minds at the same time? But I'm confident that we are going to win through. I'm confident in the future of humanity. We have to be confident for our children and our grandchildren. And so I'm going to end my address to you here, and I'm going to play a hopeful message, I think, that I recorded last October. So I hope you'll enjoy this. Hello, my friends, and thank you for joining me here at Bridgen on the Hill Church. As you know, this place is very special to me, and it's not unlike thousands of other beauty spots which dot across the landscape of our nation, which means so much to local people, grounding them in a deep sense of place that is both unique and universal. This church is most famous really for two things: the view you can see as far as Nottingham on a clear day, and the rare Saxon carvings. A monastery was built here when the Kingdom of Mercia was at the height of its powers, with some very beautiful carvings which we've retained today. In the 10th century, the Kingdom of Mercia and the other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms united to form a new nation, England, or Angelander, the land of the Angles, a nation that has stood proudly for centuries, weathering changes, celebrating victories, always moving together, moving forward. But now our nation stands on a precipice, unfortunately, of our own making. We have allowed globalists with no care for our nation, or for the nations of our brothers and sisters around the world, to buy their way into the command structures of our countries, and they seek now to transform the vibrant colours of our nations into one bland and uniform shade of grey. They poison our blood with untested medical products. They poison our bodies with food drenched in pesticides. They poison the minds of our children by spreading the nonsense that men can be women and women can be men. They poison our very freedom by trying to take away the energy that we heat our houses with, we light our way with, that's driven our progress throughout the centuries, and package it up and redistribute it to us as they see fit. And the politicians you elect to represent our nations assist them in their mission, which is nothing less than the murder of those nations. But things are changing fast. The control mechanisms of these globalists are actually a house of cards glued flimsily together by the compliance of the masses in ignorance of their true power. The overreach of COVID has slapped many of us, myself included, wide awake. Movements around the world are saying no and reaching back to their own nations, and realise if they rest on their own sovereignty, the house of cards can easily be pulled apart. As more people wake up, the more these billionaires and their pet bureaucrats realise that their power and their control is actually slipping away. Since that control is actually based in fear, it's their natural instinct to dial it up on us,
to redouble their efforts. So you must learn, we must learn, to live our lives without fear. We need to laugh, to live and to love in the face of adversity. There is nothing to fear from a virus that kills at approximately the same rate as annual influenza. There's nothing to fear about climate change because the climate has always changed. And as they shepherd us towards a third world war, how will fear help us if that nightmare comes to pass? The only thing you should be afraid of is a future planned by globalists, whose project requires your compliance and has no room for your links to special places like this. These people will not relinquish their power easily or lightly. We're going to be in for a bumpy ride. But when it's over, and it will be over, we will be able to build a new nation, something better than we had before. The Saxon kings and queens and countless English men and women fought and died so you and I could live in a nation that was prosperous, safe and free. The globalists have a different plan for our future, but all we have to say is we will not comply. All we have to say is no. And their plans are dead and buried. Thank you very much for listening to me.